So let me start by telling you all how I came across the movie I'm going to be talking about today, because it's kind of a weird one. I'm a horror guy. I don't know if you can tell that from the everything about me, but I enjoy me some horror. Especially your online media horror, your ARGs, or just accounts that are repositories of weird, creepy stuff. This has led me to following a lot of random horror-related Twitter accounts. On one of these accounts, the guy starts posting about these weird Japanese films, mockumentary films, made to resemble real-world ghost hunting shows, but the ghosts are real and heavily inspired, if not outright stated, to be Japanese folklore and urban myth creatures. This immediately pushes several of my buttons all at once. I love me some Asian cinema, Japanese and Korean especially. I love me some found footage / mockumentary stuff, and I love me some folklore / urban legends stuff, and biggest button of all, I adore the idea of a film presenting itself as a ghost investigation, but the ghosts are real. Weirdly specific, I know, but it's something I'm into. It's why I have a soft spot for grave encounters, despite the film's deeply dumb, floppy mouth monsters and half-hearted attempt at the premise. Anyway, I see these tweets, and I immediately want to see these films. I mean, how could I not? Unfortunately, it turns out that this series was never released outside of Japan, though some of the director's other work was. For some reason, the series that might as well have "Ethan, we made these movies to appeal specifically to you, my guy," written on the poster, was not available to people outside of its country of origin. Bummer. Sucks. Bad day for Ethan. As luck would have it, however, it turns out that there are copies of these films floating around the internet with fan subs that someone claimed to have and be willing to share in the replies of that Twitter thread, and I jumped at that shit, knowing full well this is exactly how you make your computer sick. Did it anyway. Got the files, virus scanned my computer about 5 times just to make sure. It's all good. I sat down, watched the first movie, and now I'm here to talk about it, because, honestly, it doesn't seem like many people have talked about it. So, let's talk about Senritsu Kaiki File Kowasugi File 1, Operation Capture the Slit-Mouthed Woman. That is the second time I've said the full title out loud. I am not sure how much of that I got wrong, but it's definitely at least some. Before I go on with this, I do want to point out, this isn't in the script, I do want to point out that I am not good at pronouncing Japanese names. I'm going to try my best, but bear with me. Here we go. Senritsu Kaiki File Kowasugi is a series of low-budget direct-to-DVD horror films directed and written by Japanese filmmaker Koji Shiraishi. Best known for his 2005 film Noroi the Curse, a found-footage mockumentary film, and his 2007 film Carved, the Slit-Mouthed Woman, or simply Kuchisake-onna. The latter of which is based on the same urban legend the film I'm talking about today deals with. The series follows a group of paranormal investigators as they paranormally investigate a series of supernatural events, most if not all of which seem to be in some way related to or based on figures of Japanese urban legend or folklore. Each film, or at least the 4 I've got access to, seem to follow a consistent format. Our main characters, Kudo and Ichikawa, receive a tape that claims to contain evidence of a supernatural encounter or event, and set out to investigate. Over the just over an hour runtime of each of the files, our investigative team uncover more details about the situation and run into increasing supernatural resistance from the subject. All the while, everything is presented in the style of a ghost hunting show, with all the overdramatic trappings and flimsy experiments that format implies. The crucial difference being, of course, that the ghosts, monsters, and events being investigated are real. The investigations being less a matter of trying to determine if the events actually took place, and more an investigation into exactly what manner of supernatural entity was seen and how it works. And that's about all I can say for the format of the series without stepping on the specific events within the individual films themselves, so let's do just that, and get on to talking about what actually happens in Operation Capture the Slit-Mouthed Woman. The film opens with our dynamic duo doing exactly what was described earlier, discussing a tape that had been sent in the mail that claims to depict supernatural events. The The tape in question shows a new pair of characters catching sight of an alarmingly tall, long-haired, masked woman standing in a back street talking loudly to herself. The pair, the taller of which is called Yugo and the smaller of which I don't know the name of because it doesn't get shown in the fan-translated subtitles, attempt to make contact with this massive and deeply suspicious-looking woman, only to invite upon themselves what more or less always happens in these situations: a brief chase. The woman turns and rushes after them at alarming speed, causing Yugo and I guess let's call him Hugo, to cry out in fear and run away. After a brief rest and some seeming teleportation on the part of the mysterious woman, we return to Kudo and Ichikawa in their office, deciding to investigate further. Oddly, this issue with people's names not being entirely clear would seem to be a regular issue with fan translations of this series. I think that these boxes that appear from time to time around the characters contain their names and how they relate to the case, but they're obviously written in kanji, which I can't read, and the characters themselves rarely refer to each other by name. It's just one of the awkward issues that tends to come up now and again in fan-subbed works. I watched enough pirated anime as a teenager to be kind of used to this, but I felt it's worth addressing in case I don't know certain characters' names or get their names wrong. Regardless, after viewing the tape, our original pair get to work. Amusingly enough, they also more or less immediately identify the ghost as being Kuchisake-onna. It's 3 minutes in and they've already decided what the ghost is. It turns out that they are correct, but it's still silly to me that they immediately decide what it is from the get-go. There is a degree of matter-of-factness about the supernatural creatures being real that just kind of tickles me. Our investigators meet up with the pair who sent the tape, interviewing them to get more details on the encounter and doing some really rudimentary tests to check if what happened in the video is physically possible. I guess it's to make sure that it is a ghost or monster they saw and not just a crazy woman, but their tests aren't exactly scientific, more or less being, well, we can't run that fast, so it's impossible. It's a bit weak, but then our investigators don't really seem to have much in the way of resources, making the best with what they can, I suppose. They check the area, interview some locals, and discover a wall covered in odd scribblings, seemingly a mixture of bizarre drawings and suicide notes that are attributed to Kuchisake-onna. They eventually turn to interviewing the local homeless population, as apparently this mysterious spectral woman has been seen by them or has been living in their camp. It's somewhat hard to pin down. Regardless, at least one of them seems to know something, and offers to talk, though he attempts to back out after realising he's being filmed, at which point Kudo literally attacks the guy to get him to speak to them. I feel at this point I should mention that Kudo is kind of insane. This may be the first violent outburst we see from him, but it's certainly not the last. While to my memory he doesn't literally smack anyone else in this movie, in the later File films he very much does, and for very little reason. Ichikawa appears to be generally kind of bored and detached from most of the situation she's in, while Kudo seems to be constantly 2 sentences away from getting up and kicking the shit out of whoever he's interviewing or whatever he's following. The man appears to have some anger issues. I describe him as having a lot of the same energy as Evan from Everyman Hybrid, running at Slenderman with a baseball bat. I mean, when they spot Kuchisake-onna later in the film, he does literally attempt to chase her with a baseball bat, but I'm getting ahead of myself, we'll get there eventually. Kudo beats the homeless man into finishing the interview, during which he describes several people going missing, seemingly because of Kuchisake-onna, and introduces our investigators to the mysterious hair talisman wrapped around his wrist, which he claims was given to him to protect him from evil. The same talisman can be seen sketched among the notes and drawings left by Kuchisake-onna. After Ichikawa takes a photo of the talisman and Kudo pays off the hobo to not go to the cops about the assault, the pair contact a folklorist expert who remarkably sounds even less interested in the situation than Ichikawa. To ask about the talisman, who in turn directs them to a medium who he claims can offer more assistance. They meet with the medium, who turns out to be a woman who is, for reasons I really don't understand even after watching the film several times, she's just really uncooperative, deeply unhelpful. The first half of the conversation is a strange, frustrating runaround in which the medium agrees to help the investigation, then attempts to start an argument with Kudo about him not knowing much about the situation, and then demanding the pair leave before eventually agreeing to help, without really changing anything. I'm genuinely baffled that Kudo didn't attack or scream at the medium, given how willing he seems to be to attack anyone for any reason. And To make things more confusing, somewhere in the middle of this conversation, we see a title card informing us that a woman named Taki Misako used to live in the village, presumably the village the medium is based out of, but that she went missing some time ago and that this woman may have been a witch rumoured to have killed the medium's younger brother. Now, this is a weird thing for the film to bring up. At no point does the medium mention this, and the first time any of the characters address this is much later, close to the end of the film, when attempting to bait Kuchisake-onna into reacting. If this information matters so much that an otherwise seemingly unrelated scene requires interruption via title cards to include it, why is there not a scene in which they discover this information? We're never told how they came to know this. It almost feels like there was a scene, or perhaps even parts of the medium interview scene, that would have explained it, but that was somehow lost or just not filmed at all. It's weird. It's pretty weird. Regardless, after wasting everyone's time with a weird hissy fit, the medium agrees to help and informs the pair that the hair talismans they've seen are in some way cursed, but she doesn't really explain what she means by cursed. She then attempts to channel the spirit of Kuchisake-onna, which will seemingly in some way be good. After a bit of chanting and the rubbing of hands, she seems to have some sort of fit, during which Kuchisake-onna appears, giving the group a scare before vanishing, leaving a drained and ill medium behind. The medium offers no useful information, despite Kudo shaking her quite vigorously in hopes that the fact would fall out, instead simply demanding that the group cease their investigation, as the spirit of Kuchisake-onna is too dark and too powerful to confront. Having found out nothing of value, the pair return to the homeless camp, trying to find the man with the talisman, only to find out that he and many of the other inhabitants have left, and that the rest are in the process of moving the camp out of fear of Kuchisake-onna. Despite this, as luck would have it, the pair actually run into the talisman man while returning to the Wall of Notes, just in time for him to be hit by a car. And who should be lurking in the background as he dies but Kuchisake-onna, now seemingly actively cutting off all avenues of information gathering for the investigators. We then return to Yugo and Hugo, one of whom has been being troubled by someone knocking at their door in the dead of night, rather aggressively. In the hopes of catching whoever it is that's doing it, Yugo hides a camera outside his front door, while Hugo has come over to offer moral support. Just a good friend, I suppose. Fortunately, their nightly visitor arrives and leaves after making a ruckus, and upon checking the tape, it is revealed that it is indeed Kuchisake-onna stumbling to Yugo's door in the middle of the night. In response to this revelation, the boys take the recording to our investigators to get their opinion. Upon reviewing the footage, Kudo and Ichikawa decided best to perform a stakeout, planning to taunt the spirit and confront her should she appear again. The boys agree to this, after having been politely but firmly convinced by Kudo not to speak to the police. Kudo is a deeply suspicious character, and I would not be surprised to find it revealed in later films that he used to be a fucking yakuza or something. His three defining features are a short and belligerent temper, swiftly resorting to violence, and telling people to not talk to the police. It's not a good combination, at least not for the people around him. If you ask me, it makes Kudo very entertaining to watch. Sometime later, the group begin their hunt. Yugo and Hugo are left in Yugo's home with a script to recite should the ghost reappear, while Ichikawa and Kudo watch the neighborhood from a nearby car, hoping to catch sight of and record the ghost as it approaches. After a few long and uneventful days, the ghost appears, staggering in front of Ichikawa's camera as she makes her way to Yugo's door. Kudo calls the boys, warning them of Kuchisake-onna's approach, and the script is deployed. Yugo asks the spirit if she is indeed Misako. This seems to take the spirit aback, as she freezes for a moment before struggling to respond, confirming that she is indeed Misako. This moment always strikes me as oddly sad, I suppose. There is something about the way Kuchisake-onna reacts which makes it almost seem like hearing the name snapped her out of the hostile hunting pattern she was in for a moment, and for a little while she seems more like a person than some kind of hostile spirit. I don't know, it could just be me reading too much into it, but I think it's quite an interesting moment. Following the script he was given, Yugo then insists that Kuchisake-onna is not Misako, and demands to know why she's pretending to be. He asks her who she is and why she's lying, and what little humanity seemed to come to the ghost after hearing the name leaves as quickly as it arrived. A title card appears, claiming that the woman is indeed Misako, but seemingly possessed by Kuchisake-onna. As with the title card that mentioned Misako in the first place, this feels out of place, and it's unclear what exactly justifies this conclusion. In response to the accusations, Kuchisake-onna begins mumbling incoherently, the sound of which seems to send Yugo and Hugo into fits, similar to those which came over the medium while she was attempting the ritual earlier. As the pair convulse and shake on the ground, Kuchisake-onna draws a knife from her coat on the other side of the door. The investigators, still on the phone to the boys, can hear that something is going wrong. Kudo honks the car's horn aggressively, which takes Kuchisake-onna's attention away from the boys and towards the sound, inducing her to leave and to move towards our investigators. She appears, standing menacingly in front of the vehicle, at which point Kudo's instinctual need for violence overwhelms him, and he runs her over. This only seems to inconvenience her, however, as she quickly gets to her feet, finally revealing her scarred face in the gleam of the car's headlights, before she takes off down an alleyway, fleeing into the night. Despite the boys calling for help, rather than going directly to assist them, Kudo attempts to chase Kuchisake-onna, at first by car, then on foot, taking a baseball bat he brought with him as he runs through the streets at night, quite clearly intent on beating her with it should she appear. Unfortunately for Kudo, they are unable to track her down. We are then told, via title card, that after that night, despite Hugo seemingly taking the brunt of whatever peculiar effect Kuchisake-onna was exerting on the boys, Yugo vanished entirely. Sometime later, our investigators, accompanied by Hugo, return to Yugo's apartment to search it, finding it largely as it was, the only exception being an odd collection of those hair talismans arranged in an ominous symbol on the floor. Kudo collects them and the trio leave, considering the case closed, though as they leave, it becomes apparent that they were not the only ones in the apartment that day. I fucking love this shot, by the way. Just love this shot. Okay, let's actually discuss the thing instead of just doing a summary now. And because people suck, including me, and are more interested in the negatives, which, yep, that still includes me, let's talk about the film's failings. First, and least, I should address some issues with the translation. Now, this isn't a criticism of the film itself, for obvious reasons, and for other obvious reasons it isn't something that should be surprising, but the fan sub going around has some problems. Anyone who watched relatively obscure anime before the rise of services like Crunchyroll is likely aware of the weirdness that tends to creep into fan-done hobby translations, and this is no exception. There are several spelling errors, formatting issues, and other things that make it hard to tell who is saying what. On-screen text isn't consistently translated, leading to the issue of being hard to determine characters' names, and beyond that, there appear to be times when the subtitles are just flatly wrong. Recently, I was informed that a scene early in the film in which the ghost appears to invoke the name of a demonic entity from an earlier work of Shiraishi's is just flatly an incorrect subtitle. The ghost seems to actually be complaining that all men are monsters or something to that effect, which, given the events of the film and the Kuchisake-onna myth itself, makes a lot more sense than a bizarre reference to an earlier work that is in no other way connected to these movies. These things by no means ruin the film, and it would be unfair to hold these issues common to fan translations against this film in particular, but I feel I have to at least mention it, given that if you decide to watch the films after hearing about them here, you're likely to watch the same fan translation I saw. It's something to be aware of. The film itself has flaws enough of its own, however. The pacing is a bit peculiar, with several scenes being essentially filler, giving the audience little new information and being fairly static. It's mostly made up of interviews with the various characters connected to the investigation, many of which seem to go around in circles arbitrarily before finally getting around to sharing the information needed to progress the story, the interviews with the homeless man and the medium being especially bad in this regard. On top of this, when it comes to information the film does feel the need to impart to the viewer, it does so very inelegantly, making frequent use of title cards simply telling you what you need to know, the most egregious example of this being the inclusion of the Misako name, literally coming out of nowhere to suddenly become vitally important to them dealing with the ghost. It could also be easily argued that the ending is quite unsatisfying and ultimately nothing gets accomplished. Kudo and Ichikawa start the investigation believing the ghost to be Kuchisake-onna and end the investigation still believing the ghost to be Kuchisake-onna. Nothing is really done to deal with the spirit, it simply kills several people and then runs off into the night. Rather than ending in a more expected and arguably satisfying way for this kind of narrative, with the ghost defeated or appeased or the entire crew dead, the story just stops, with Kuchisake-onna implied to still be a problem, but being left very much to her own devices, with little concern from Kudo or Ichikawa. It's somewhat awkwardly translated, at times feels oddly meandering, and doesn't end in the satisfying way that you'd expect a film like this to end. However, despite its flaws, indeed partially because of its flaws, I kinda love it. Let me explain. I'm a man who has a weakness for well-done gimmicks, and Senritsu Kaiki file Kowasugi leans fully into its gimmick more than most horror projects I've seen, other than certain ARGs. The conceit of the piece is that this is one in a series of essentially ghost hunting shows, as I said at the beginning, the only difference being that in these films the ghosts and monsters they're investigating are real, but that doesn't really change the format of the show that we're watching. In real ghost shows, you get these in-your-face replays of apparent ghost activity, only here we can literally see a supernatural entity rather than just seeing a shadow moving strangely on a wall. We get the weird, overly long interviews trying to build up suspense and dread and build up a picture in our minds. In normal ghost shows, these used to lend more credence to the idea that we were witnessing supernatural events. Here, it's lend context to actual supernatural events, but they're presented in the same way. It's why we get dumb experiments and experts that don't actually prove anything. These are common tropes in the types of shows that this film is a parody of. It's why we have the overly dramatic transitions and graphics on the screen, trying so hard to look spooky that it sometimes just comes off as a bit camp. It's why at the end nothing is really resolved, because frankly, name me a ghost show that has ever actually resolved anything. While these things, yes, make it a less satisfying piece of narrative fiction, it makes it feel so much more like the kind of trashy ghost hunting show it's trying to replicate. One of the things that I adore about well-made found footage or mockumentary-style films is the sense of authenticity. Because if the events really did take place, if it was an accurate documentary of actual supernatural encounters, it wouldn't be nicely and neatly wrapped up narratively. It wouldn't function like a perfectly crafted plot-based machine, because the reality of the situation wouldn't let it, because actual events aren't satisfying and cathartic most of the time. These flaws in the pacing and the presentation, to my mind, can kind of add to that air of authenticity, and end up being a big part of why I enjoyed the film. Beyond that, while Ichikawa is a bit of an empty vessel of a character, Kudo is oddly engaging and strangely endearing. Despite him being just wildly violent, I can't explain why, there is something about him, about how deeply fucking crazy he seems to be, that I really enjoy. He seems, despite his curmudgeonly attitude, to be very passionate about what he's doing, even if that passion does occasionally make him attack homeless people. Beyond the simple gimmick, the film does have some pretty decent scares in it, to my mind. Some solid, creepy imagery as well. Again, that final shot is absolutely perfect. This film and the films that follow it are a breath of fresh air when compared to the last decade or so of found footage ghost movies showing moving objects and people just walking vaguely spookily. Instead, this film gives you proper monsters. It's a unique experience, for sure, and one which I recommend wholeheartedly. Is it for everyone? Definitely not. I love this film because it appeals directly to a load of my own specific weird niche tastes. Chances are, you don't have all those same exact niche tastes, but give it a go anyway. There's very little else like it. Well, that was the review. I hope you enjoyed it. It's been quite a few years since I actually wrote a movie review. I think the last time I did one was back when I was in college, and I made a video about, of all things, Dark Flaws, the horror movie starring the band Lordy as the monsters. Let me know what you thought about the review, if you would, and let me know if you decide to go looking for the Senritsu Kaiki file Kowasugi films yourself. Almost completely screwed up the name. And what you think of them, if you find them. I don't want to directly link to where I got them from, because while they've never been released outside of Japan, I don't want to risk getting in trouble for spreading pirated content, but if I could find them accidentally, I'm sure people looking for them on purpose won't have to try very hard to find them. As ever, big thanks to the members of Parliament whose Patreon donations help me with money stuff. I don't know when the next thing I'm making here will be out, or even what it'll be. Although, again, going off script here, I did find out I do actually still have all of the footage for The Suffering Ties That Bind. So it might be that, but no promises. But whatever it is, I don't know when it's going to be out, so just keep an eye out. God, you can tell I talk differently when I'm not on a script. Jumping, fucking Jesus. That's all. I'm bad at the goodbyes. Bye.